Everybody to another Beyond Bitcoin Hangout. Today is Friday, February 26th, 2016. If you're hearing this, you're listening to the raw Hangout. That means it is not edited whatsoever. We are joined today by Bytemaster of CNX, one of the chief development firms working on BitShares, and the first one to initiate the coding and the journey that we would call the BitShares experience. And with that said, we're going to start out today with about 10-15 minutes of Bytemaster providing updates. And the other aspect of this, the community members who have not been here before, you're more than welcome to speak up at any time, but we try to ask that we keep the initial phase for updates and stuff like that. And then afterwards, feel free to ask any questions that you feel are pertinent. Of course, try to be respectful. And if you cannot speak out loud or you do not wish to, please feel free to ask the questions in the little message box in the bottom left-hand corner of the Mumble client. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and really quick ask everybody, because last time I saw it was Rose that was share dropped on people, and I'm not sure they did not provide any information about it. But if anybody knows any information about it and would like to give me that after the hangout, I would love to create something and talk a little bit about it and add it onto the edited footage. So with that said, Bytemaster, please don't let me hold you off from giving the updates.
All right, so brief update on Stealth. I'll probably have a little bit more update on it by the end of this call. I'm still getting reports in from the team. We are deploying the Stealth API and user interface to the test network today. So later today, you'll be able to test the user interface on the test network that Xerox put together. And then we'll move it on to the BitShares network if there are no problems. We don't want people losing funds. It's a lot easier to lose money with Stealth in terms of keys or losing receipts or things like that. So we are being extra cautious on the rollout of this feature in the user interface. So there's that. Other than that, the other thing that's going on is I'm going to start working on a proposal for a bond market. This will be a high-level specification of how the bond market could work, what the operations are, and a high-level guide of what would be required to implement it on the BitShares network for the community to review. This effort is being funded by community members. So I'd like to thank the proactive support of people out there who are helping fund the research and development necessary to make this happen. The only thing that's funded so far is the building of the specification of the feature. Implementation is to be determined.
How can one help with deriving these specifications?
It's really a process that I've got to go through in my head to get as many loose ends and details and edge cases as I can think of. And then once I get all that stuff organized into a document, then we can have a peer review period on the forum, during which time everyone will be able to refine and tweak the proposal. My goal is to get the proposal to a point that it's a pretty good straw man, and it's just fine tuning rather than completely open ended. I'll guide the discussion there.
Okay.
So, well, I guess before I go into that, are there any other updates?
The hard fork appears to have gone smoothly. We are being very cautious in all these updates, so things are taking longer than I expected them to take, but we can be grateful that Ben, Valentine, and James are doing their best to make sure that as we roll this out, there are no major disturbances to the blockchain. We know that we're going to be triggering some of the new code with a few operations, and so we're testing a lot of this stuff on private test networks to make sure that all the hard fork logic behaves as we expect it to. So I guess that's the main thing, is the stuff's coming. The guys have been working on it full time. I'm as anxious as everyone else is to see all this work complete. If I had some magic way that I could whip them to perform faster, I would. But I think the only thing that pushing on them will cause mistakes to be made and make unhappy workers. So instead of choosing to be very happy with the fact that they're cautious and are doing their due diligence before we roll out these major changes. So, but I just wanted to assure Once Upon a Time and the others who have invested money in Stealth that we are working on it, and it's basically implemented right now. I've seen it all work. I saw it all work on Monday. So this entire week has been about fine-tuning the things, making sure fees are displayed properly and things like that. So it's mostly there. We're just making sure that there are as few issues as possible when we roll it out. So once again, I'd like to thank everyone for patience. I'm really excited about this feature. I'm sure there's some whales out there who are also excited about the feature. Once it's out, I'll be asking Xerox to document a process for exchanges. This is probably the first he's heard of it. So document how exchanges can use Stealth to accept deposits. I think it would be a great benefit to everyone if people didn't have to fear their every move being telegraphed to the whole world. So
Along these lines, real quick, this is something that Noisy brought up on the forums. What is the status of the migration to the new fork? And a couple questions he was asking in there was along these lines, and he asked one here, what exactly are we getting? And it sounds to me like the hard fork could be boiled down into the features for Stealth, or are there any additional things that are added into that release?
the primary things in the release were support for the stealth fees getting directed to the stealth asset. We need to issue a few transactions on the network before that will happen. But once we do, then that'll be the case. We added support for parameterizing the updates of those for the stealth asset having voting power over the fees. And that's the automatic market buybacks. Those are the features we added in the hard fork. The other features that we implemented were lots and lots of bug fixes and API improvements. Some of those APIs, some bugs were discovered after release. We've fixed a lot of bugs this past week. And so there will probably be a non-hard fork release that includes things with the API improvements. Pretty much the only people that will have to upgrade for that will be open ledgers and API servers. Witnesses will not have to upgrade, and exchanges will not have to upgrade. So there will probably be another release next week with just a bug fix release with those things in it.
Bytemaster, with regard to feature-backed assets in the future, do you anticipate that we would need a hard fork for pretty much all of them, or what's your take on that?
So long term, I'd like to see us have a virtual machine of some kind within BitShares. The idea behind the virtual machine I have in mind is that we should be able to replace the virtual machine contracts with optimized contracts that don't run inside a virtual machine, so that we can test features on the blockchain without having to ask anyone's permission, and anything that's small scale is not that big of an issue. But then mature features we would hard fork for. So I am very interested in seeing the Ethereum virtual machine running on the BitShares network. We would have a lot of advantages using their identical virtual machine on our platform. Those advantages include the fact that our blockchain is more or less irreversible after 3 seconds. There are almost no forks. So the latency between confirmations in contracts will be a lot lower. So that makes it a lot nicer for application developers. They don't have to consider chain reorganizations to the same extent that they have to on Ethereum. With a few other small changes, we could probably also process a lot higher transaction volume and have lower fees than Ethereum currently has, because we'll be able to do the use the rate limiting approach that we have on BitShares. So that rate limiting approach has been implemented. The next hard fork will incorporate that. So that's where I'd like to see BitShares go. I would like to have we can have actually simultaneously support multiple virtual machines. But supporting Ethereum's virtual machine will be a great way to get those contracts, all the people that are working on Ethereum now to say, hey, maybe I should consider BitShares because my contracts work just the same and it's faster. So I think that's the main thing. That will reduce the need to hard fork for little things and little experiments. At the end of the day, though, the model of BitShares is to implement the best smart contracts in a parameterized fashion for the highest performance. It's sort of like creating a template where, like the smart coins are a template. You can pick your parameters, control whitelist, non-whitelist, all those things. It's a template for a very generic currency contract. So there's a continuum. a lot of people, it's easier to create a asset on BitShares than it is to create a custom currency on Ethereum. But yeah. So the main challenge we have is making the Ethereum virtual machine aspect integrate with the rest of the BitShares network versus being its own sandbox. Technically, it's possible to integrate the Ethereum virtual machine without the need for a hard fork right now. Using the custom operations, there would just be no ability to transfer BitShares or our assets into the virtual machine. But with a little bit of work, we can bridge the states of the BitShares database and the virtual machine database. Anyway, that will be a longer term roadmap. And a year ago, we were talking about putting a virtual machine into BitShares, and we just postponed it, recognizing that we wanted to get the core contracts running efficiently. And so.
What kind of performance differences on average would there be between just having something running on the virtual machine versus having it native to the code? I mean, do you foresee that the majority of these smart contract applications are just going to continue to run in the virtual machine, or is there a major advantage? You know, what's the big difference?
So here's my take on Augur. Augur is a prediction market system being built on Ethereum. Great contracts. For a platform like that to be successful, and successful to the point of all the other sports betting sites out there and all the other prediction market sites, right? If you look at the transaction volume of that market and the transaction rate that Augur could support on the Ethereum protocol, you'd realize that it's just not possible with their current architecture to reach the scales they need. With what we're doing, we focus on security, scalability, and efficiency, which means it's much easier for us to get the same type of feature to a scale that actually matters. I guess what I'm saying is proving a concept, implementing a working model is very different than taking a proven concept and growing it to a scale that's necessary to make a lot of money or to really appeal to the masses. The challenge is, how do you transition from, okay, we've proven the concept, it's great, people like it, to bring on all the new users, and what do you have to do? Do you end up having to break your system and migrate all your users to a new platform or a new architecture? Or do you just scale up the architecture you already have? That's the challenge of Ethereum and building smart contracts in that manner. The thing that makes Ethereum slow relative to graphene is two things. One, the virtual machine is a stack machine with very large 256-bit word, 256-bit addresses and values. It's not a very efficient mapping to the underlying hardware. The other is the way the data is stored or addressed. You look up based on a 256-bit key, and you get a 256 bits of value. It's a very expensive way to look up your data. Your address is as big as the data you're reading. Lastly, every time you read or write data, it's doing expensive computations to set up the trigraph or the Merkle tree of the data. Those computations are, in theory, not necessary if you're running a deterministic computation on. Having those there, it's sort of like a checksum. A checksum is good if you're going to have errors in your computation. You want to be able to detect them. But the philosophy of BitShares is we've certified the inputs and we've defined the algorithm. Therefore, everything after that should be a deterministic derivation. So that's the basis of the scalability issues. And we can scale further by removing some assumptions, changing other things about how the virtual machine operates, and so on and so forth. But for compatibility reasons, because they've got languages and compilers and all that other fun stuff, just taking their virtual machine and changing their storage model to be an in-memory storage system, which they have an in-memory version, but to remove the checksumming aspect of it can help it scale better on BitShares.
Are there any other virtual machine alternatives to the Ethereum EVM that you see as being a potentially viable choice?
There is another alternative, but the challenge is always the tooling, the languages for compiling to the virtual machine to support the documentation. Ethereum has that in spades, and that's something that's not easy to replicate. It'd be possible for me to implement a virtual machine and get something rolled out really quickly, but without the tooling and the compilers, it's not necessarily any easier for developers than writing a hard fork patch. So
Tess is saying IBM VM supports JavaScript. Is that going to change anything?
yes, that's huge. The challenge with JavaScript is removing the non-deterministic calculations from the language. So if you take something like JavaScript, you switch it all over to integer math, and you make object iteration deterministic, and you make garbage collection deterministic in some way, then the environment is much better. It's a perfect VM.
So that could be done. From what he's saying, it'll be supporting it this year. Tess, do you have any information on that further, or any comments that you'd like to bring up?
Just because you're in a virtual machine doesn't mean it's deterministic. A virtual machine that does floating point operations will generate different numbers on different architectures. Unless the virtual machine does all the floating point operations with integer software floating points, which would dramatically slow it down, not deterministic.
If this might sound like an amateur question, but if something is written in say whatever code is used for the EVM, we have Ethereum's virtual machine. How easily is that translated then into C++ to create a hard fork patch once the concept or the app is proven on the virtual machine?
I don't have a good answer without more study.
Fair enough.
So, what are your thoughts on how best to potentially go around implementing this, or testing it, or getting some people working on it?
I can tell you that our team is completely saturated, so we need to bring in new talent if we want to make this happen.
Does anybody have any thoughts on bounties to bring developers from other cryptocurrency platforms who have worked on things like this, who might be in the best position to partner with us?
Well, let's address some of these things. There's the ongoing debate about dilution or paying workers. It's really a question of whether or not we want to spend money to make money, or we want to cut expenses to increase the appearance of profits. We all know what happens when CEOs come in and they fire everyone to boost earnings. In the short term, the price goes up. In the long term, the company fails. When you say that we want to cut all spending, what you're saying is we want to fire the employees so that it looks like we're profitable. But where we cut off our air supply, we're going to die in a year or two if we don't do that. So, from that perspective, there's only one option, and that option is to reward people with stake in the system who make contributions to improve it. If we no longer reward contributions, you no longer get contributions directly. Fee-backed assets are a great way of doing that. In this case, that's voting for hard forks. There's two things we need from the community. One is welcoming people with open arms who are willing to fund things, approve their hard forks, and don't complain when they don't want to share the profits with you. Or they only want to cover the bare necessary network expenses. So attitude is very important. Anyone who's here on these mumble sessions, I'm guessing I'm probably preaching to the choir. You guys are great. You show up every week. You understand all this stuff because you're obviously following along. So what we need to do as a community of mumble users is reach out and help other people understand these things and be positive. Any proxies here, I've noticed a lot of proxies are voting for the refund workers and for other workers. The net result is you're canceling your vote out. You're raising the threshold to get paid, but you're not actually expressing an opinion on who should be paid. So removing your vote for some of the refund workers will help get people like Z-Rock and Abit paid. So please look at your votes, look at the impact, vote accordingly. The other thing you can do to help get people paid is to downvote the the refund workers. That will shift it. On this note, I would like to see a hard fork in the future that removes the ability to downvote worker proposals. It probably never should have been there in the first place for the same reason we don't have downvoting of witnesses. At the end of the day, you can create a new worker and vote for it. So you should just express what you want rather than trying to stomp out and vote against everything. The system's more secure if we don't have downvoting, because with downvoting, it means you have to take action to push people down rather than only having to take action to lift people up. So I don't think I explained that very well, but I would like to encourage a change that would remove the downvote option.
Bytemaster, could you comment on your take on Empirical's proposal for the Empirical's proposal? Could you make a comment on that? I noticed that you and Stan have been absent from that discussion.
Sure. Can you summarize the proposal for the audience?
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Well, this is actually a question that's been asked on the forums. I was going to get to it, but if you'd like to read it off,
go for it, Fuzzy. I'm not prepared to actually summarize it very effectively, so you've got that well at hand. Why don't you go ahead and do that?
Oh, okay. Well, I'll read the question. It's from T-Bone, and he says, "Hi, Fuzzy. Please put Empirical 1.2's yield idea, links below, on the agenda for today. It seems like a very viable, relatively easy to implement way to bootstrap bit assets substantially while incentivizing people to move their BTS balances onto the DEX, which are two very important goals." Now, I'll go ahead and go in here.
Let me pause right there and say that, in summary, the proposal has to do with yield harvesting, and he differentiates the approach for yield harvesting versus the way it was in 1.0 from the source, and that it's not being sourced from the same place that it was in 1.0. It's coming from the reserve pool. So he thinks that will be a better approach, and it will have a lot more positive impact than it did from the source it came from in 1.0. I'm not sure if that's true or not. That's why I'm really interested to hear your take on it, Bytemaster.
And here is the theory behind it. He says, number one, centralized company can benefit from sign-up deposit bonuses, but a DAC altcoin usually can't, especially in the short term. And two, a DAC slash altcoin can benefit in the short and medium term from delayed bonuses such as subsidizing yield, but a centralized exchange usually can't. So he goes into this with those two points for basis.
Well, I'll say, generally speaking, I read his post and thought he was reading my mind. The biggest challenge we face is not a technical one. It's a political one within this community. I've addressed similar ideas in the past about paying people to lock up funds. Theoretical has addressed this in the past of, and at the end of the day, that's all yield is paying people to lock up funds. In this case, we'd be paying people to lock them up in bit assets by owning USD. When we pay people to lock it up in USD, at the end of the day, all that's really saying is it creates demand to hold the bit assets. People go short, they yield harvest, they short to themselves, so they're not really short, and you can never know if someone's short. That's one of the things that we've learned. And so at the end of the day, it turns into paying interest on the collateral, because people will short to themselves until the interest rate on the bit asset, the USD, falls to the point where it no longer makes sense to short to yourself. Someone pointed out that I keep saying so, and now I notice it every time I say it, so I'm sorry. So.
Don't say so anymore. See how hard it is.
Yeah, I can't even start a sentence. I guess what I'm saying is yield harvesting. It's the same thing as paying interest to people who lock up their BitShares. That idea has been routinely rejected in the past, but I think it is sound. It's sound for two reasons. We want to reward commitment to the blockchain. It gives people a reason to stay in, even if they might otherwise leave, because as long as they're making more by staying in than the price is falling, they're somewhat neutral. But by being locked in, it also encourages them to engage in the process, encourages them to be active voters. It discourages people from selling if they don't like where things are going. So I really believe that using dilution in this form transfers ownership from those who want liquidity to those who are willing to commit to the platform. Paying it on bid assets will have the impact of artificially inflating the supply of USD or CNY or whatever other asset we have in there. Most of it will be held by people who are simultaneously long and short. So it wouldn't actually create any net leverage position or net USD position. So
one thing that has puzzled me, and I'm probably one of the densest people in regard to this idea, but for some reason or another, I just can't seem to be convinced that this policy of paying interest on holdings, BitUSD or whatever, would not help liquidity. Now, it just seems like such a contrary thing, because in one case you're incentivizing people to buy and hold, and on the other case you want people to not keep things but to rather trade them. So I'm really not sure why it is that it's so hard for me to be convinced that this will help liquidity.
It won't help liquidity. People will short to themselves. It won't. It's not like you need to actually use the market to create USD or to cover. So if you're not using the market, there's no liquidity.
So this is a liquidity proposal. It would be a good way of boiling it down for him or anybody else who's kind of curious.
It's proposed as a liquidity proposal, but what I'm saying is it won't improve liquidity. It will increase the amount of USD that we publish that exists, but most of that USD will be held by someone who's simultaneously short, which means it's meaningless. Those people just hold BTS, and they're getting paid for holding their BTS. And it's even worse. They're not being paid for committing to hold their BTS because they could still sell it at any time. So the proposals we've had in the past of paying people to lock up their BTS in a manner that they can't sell were actually better than this proposal. Now, if we wanted to reward liquidity with this money, then you would actually increase market activity, reduce the spread, and then you'll get more natural USD. You want USD to go into the order books. I suppose if we only paid this yield to USD held in open orders, then you would increase the order book depth of USD, which will give shorts confidence and that they can cover. Because right now what we're lacking, shorts don't have confidence that they can cover at a reasonable price because people get their dollars and they hold on to their dollars. And it'll be even worse if people get their dollars and they're getting paid interest to hold on to their dollars.
So you're basically agreeing with me that it doesn't incentivize liquidity.
Correct. It does not incentivize liquidity. You would not need to use the market at all in order to profit from his proposal.
Well, that's been my gut feeling about the whole thing. So I'm not sure that that other people see it the same way for whatever reason.
That's why we bring all of you guys together. Real quick, Silent Maker has a point or a question here that he's trying to ask that I think kind of fits into the general conversation. What about the BitShares treasury, BitShares treasury bond that recycles fees as interest? This would essentially be rewarding investors willing to lend funds to BitShares, and the network could vote on the most value uses of the proceeds. This isn't simply providing yield to those who lock up BTS, but those who are willing to reinvest in the network. I also think this would help a good deal for demand for our products, hence liquidity. And this would be, I'm assuming, possible once you guys work on the bond market stuff, if that gets voted in. But my question, I guess, is more on the topic of a BitShares treasury bond.
These are all great ideas. The biggest thing we need to conquer is how we plan to fund ideas and how we plan to prioritize. So if we can solve those issues first, a lot of these concepts that we've been discussing here, whether it's an Ethereum virtual machine, Augur style prediction markets, a bond market, these are all major features that take months to develop and test on the back end and in the GUI. Months of development is a long-term commitment from the voters. So if there's not security in the ability to get paid, then it's a lot harder to plan for. Fee-backed assets are a great way to go. The thing to consider with fee-backed assets is whether or not charging fees is actually the best approach. At the end of the day, I think we gain more from network effect than we would from any fees we charge, and all fees counter the network effect, which suggests that paying for things by voting for features is potentially superior to fee-backed assets. Fee-backed assets necessitate fees, or they necessitate an altcoin.
And essentially take away some of the value to BTS, right?
They do. They take the rewards and give them to the people who funded it, which is where it should be. Passing up opportunities to fund things that could grow the value of BitShares is short-sighted. The challenge is not everyone agrees on what will grow the value of BitShares the most. Will a virtual machine grow the value of BitShares? Will a bond market magically solve liquidity? Will subsidizing liquidity magically produce liquidity? Those are the questions that we've got to address. So from where I sit, the proposal to rate limit fees for percentage-based fees. Those two proposals that have already been mostly implemented by ABIT are the next things that we should integrate in the GUI and hard fork for, followed shortly thereafter by the subsidizing leaving orders on the books. That will definitely improve liquidity and reduce spreads. Everything else is harder to measure the impact. We want to pay people to do what we want them to do. The challenge is if we use our limited dilution budget on funding subsidized liquidity, that's less money to pay for development. So we need to balance out those two and go from there.
This is a very interesting topic that I think we can go into quite in a lot of depth. The question I guess I would have is there anybody from the Chinese community who would like to kind of give their opinions? And I know it wouldn't necessarily be fully representative of the Chinese community, but kind of give an opinion on what types of things the Chinese community and the English-speaking community, what they could kind of agree upon with respect to stuff like this, as far as what workers get voted in and the things that are considered core to BitShares. Because I think that's the tie-up really, is there's a bunch of disagreement between those two sides, if you want to call them sides. And I'm not sure how we fix it. Maybe a poll. Nobody from the Chinese community has any input on this? Yeah, it's difficult. Now, the Chinese community, does anybody know or have any statistics on the Chinese community's holdings compared to what we might call Western holdings or other holdings? Do we have any resource to see kind of like based on geographic region, kind of like how Bitcoin does? Who owns the most BitShares, so to speak?
Isn't it fueled by the fact that there's a exchange that is voting?
I'm having a difficult time you once upon a time.
Isn't it skewed by the fact that there's an exchange which is voting in China?
Could you possibly type it?
I still wonder if some of the issue isn't just the lack of overall participation in voting. I mean, you know, we still have what I would consider a relatively small fraction of the total BTS stake actually voting. You know, so I do recognize and agree that there are sort of a lot of differences probably stemming from many different places. You know, not just cultural or language, but, you know, just, you know, sort of those are big enough barriers as it is to separate people from, being able to understand fully. I know that problems in the past have stemmed from just misinterpretations, plain and simple misunderstandings of, things that were said, etc. So, but regardless of all of that, I still think that we often have a slightly different view, if not wholly different view on the forums, than what necessarily at the end of the day comes down to, what people vote with their money, put their money where their mouth is, or vote with their stake. I've seen it happen on multiple occasions where, for all appearances, it looks like everyone's against something, and then you see it get voted in the next day.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, there is a difference between what, people who are holding versus, people who have big mouths, so to speak, or people who are just active, and have, let's say, people who are opinionated, have strong opinions, So I don't know. I mean, I've always kind of tried to take the take the view philosophically, so to speak, that there is a huge advantage to having a huge community, in both the West and in China. I mean, I think that there are ways in which that can facilitate, the robustness that is, from what I can see, not too many other crypto communities have. But excuse me.
It's also kind of a check on on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, the flip side of it, of course, is that, there are I was talking to someone the other day and mentioned, I wonder how effective and how prosperous BitShares could be if there were actually two separate BitShares chains, and one of them was a Chinese chain and one of them was a Western chain, and whether or not, both communities wouldn't have very valuable things to bring and, to their own markets. And I mean, we're talking about two cultures that are probably as different from each other as it can be on this planet, right? I mean, maybe not 100%, but there are major differences in some very fundamental ways that we understand things, and that's probably only part of it. I mean, I think there are a big part of it is also the communication, difficulties. So, but anyway, yeah, I mean, I think that, going back to my very first point, the fact that we still have a relatively small amount of stake actually voting, I think, is a bigger indicator than, what we think people might want. I think if once I see, 60, 70, 80% of the BTS stake actually voting in some way, probably mostly via proxy, then I think, we can have a discussion as to whether or not, we're able to join together and get things done. Right now we have, 20, maybe 25% of the stake voting. I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but it doesn't seem like it's nearly enough to say, this is an accurate straw poll.
That's well, and I'm not saying that that's the only thing that's getting in the way at all. What I'm saying really is we need to try to start coordinating, and I'm very interested in trying to help that along.
If we want more
because
voting,
I think that there is a. Go ahead.
If we want more voting, we need to pay for voting. But we don't want to just pay for voting in a dumb way where it doesn't matter who you vote for. Or it's not the casting of the vote, it's the maintaining of votes. And this is a challenge. We want to reward those who vote and continue to vote. But we also don't want them to be able to. People vote with their feet. And that's really what's going on. Is I don't like where this is going, I sell. If I like where it's going, I buy. And that is a more effective and safe way of voting. We got to discourage people from voting with their feet and encourage them to vote and write out their consequences.
Real quick, everybody, please. I hate to interrupt. It's just running out of time. If you could please sign the guest book, to be posted on the share drop list. That would be very helpful.
I have a feeling that once more businesses build their own specialized wallets for BitShares, that we're going to see more of a, I don't want to say a complete consolidation, but you know, if you're bringing on thousands or hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of new users, right? And you have a stipulation in your wallet that says something like, hey, if you like what we're doing, set your proxy and let us handle this. I mean, I think there's going to be a trend towards new users who are just using BitShares sort of because they have some application on top of it that they're using, and they're not really concerned with the underlying BitShares or community or anything, are going to likely be encouraged just to set a proxy to whatever business it is that they're using, whatever DAC it is, or whatever application it is. And so, eventually we will see a sort of consolidation of voting power into the hands of the people who actually have the most to, gain or lose by, specifically the businesses that are building on BitShare. So, I mean, I think we have a lot of issues at this very early stage that I think we try to, scramble to come up with potential solutions for that might not necessarily be the ultimate sort of outworking of how this all unfolds once BitShares matures and builds into sort of some closer, resembling more closely the end goal or end vision, which is just having BitShares be sort of the base layer and having multiple businesses and applications built on top of BitShares with multiple different clients or wallets or whatever that people are interacting with. So I don't know. I think that's something to consider too. That all of our problems might not be
Definitely worth
solvable at this
considering.
stage.
I have a thought why actually people do not vote via BitShares. Actually, there are two reasons. The first one is that simply when people approach BitShares, usually they buy some small amount of BitShares, so they may feel that their vote do not weight enough. There is they cannot change anything with their votes. So we should educate people that they could use the proxies. That is the first thing. And the second reason I think is important why people do not vote. Actually, I think voting is difficult, but not from the technical point of view. Wallet is great point, but actually people sometimes do not understand what is the point of voting for specific proposals. From my point of view, I see that each proposal is very technical. It's okay because people has to be very detailed about things which they want to deliver. However, it is not very fun to read that. It's very difficult to just skim all proposals and have a very brief opinion about whether I support this or not. So it's very difficult, and people do not want to waste 2 hours to read very technical stuff. And I would like to also comment Bytemaster idea that we could pay people for voting. Actually, I think this is not a good idea because that might cause that people will vote without any opinion just because they will get some money. And this could cause that people without even reading proposals will vote for anything just because.
Well, out of curiosity, I mean, doesn't the fact that we have proxies help that situation? I mean, to me, it seems easier actually to vote for a single proxy that I trust than to go out and vote individually on various things.
I had an idea that actually it's also difficult to choose a proxy because first of all I had to choose a specific one, and this is possible when I knew what specific person thinks about certain things. So imagine that I'm a person who like to support all worker proposals which are about development and reject all worker proposals which are about higher fees. So I do not know. I don't know who exactly supports my my thinking. So maybe we could create some kind of tagging system where I could, for example, semi-automatical vote for yes for fees or for no, and yes for development or something like that.
Well, the tagging system's not a bad establish a reputation for proxies, but the approach I've taken in choosing my proxies, I don't vote on individual items either. I've chosen proxies. I've split my account into two. Two different proxies are voting for me. And the way I do it is I just form an opinion based on the post. I read the forum a lot, and based on what I read in the forum, I get a perspective of what that person that I choose as a proxy, how they think. And so that's what I base my proxies on, is what I see posted in the forums by these individuals.
I think we can make the system a lot more effective if, rather than just typing in a name, someone gets the wallet, they say, oh, I want to set a proxy. And then the first question is, well, what do I enter in this text field? I've got to go find people who might be proxies. So you go over to cryptofresh.com and you can look at, here's the top 10 proxies, and there's not that many of them. We could put the top 10 proxies, give them an actual dedicated spot in the wallet where we describe, like, well, one paragraph, this is what I stand for. And then rather than having to enter text, you just pick one of the proxies to be your proxy. That will tend to centralize proxy voting, but I think it's going to be centralized automatically unless you do enough research to pick your own proxy. So a simple change like that would probably make it a lot easier. You go to voting, pick your proxy, or do it myself. And we'd probably recommend that most people pick a proxy, and they're given 10 choices at most on who they want their proxy to be. And one of them would be, and the last one is, I'll be my own proxy. And then if you pick to be your own proxy, then you go and you vote for individual things. That approach too many options causes people not to decide. In fact, 10 is probably too many options. There are probably only, how many political parties are there, right? At the end of the day, proxies are very close to political parties. But at the same time, we don't want to bias opinion in too many ways. But I think Open Ledger and the wallet can identify, like, the major platforms, and we pick one proxy that represents each major point of view, and then users will have the ability to express a more detailed opinion if they want to, but we just give them a few choices rather than infinite.
One of the things that I oppose that perspective on Bytemaster is it does indeed centralize, and what criteria you use to represent the proxy is key. And that's difficult to do. I mean, there's lots of criteria that people have as to why they choose a given proxy. And so what criteria you use to post the 10 or the 5 or whatever you choose in there, those are going to be the ones that you're going to centralize around, because that's the easy way for people to go. So I'd rather have something like a CryptoFresh or some other out-of-band way to rate the proxies and then choose from that.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the danger of sort of canonizing, or consecrating a particular group of people that end up, whether or not Open Ledger, whether or not Ronnie chooses to include something like this in the wallet, I guess it wouldn't be too harmful if just said, okay, top 10, and that way whoever happened to be in the top 10 gets in. But yeah, it's interesting because you're right, Tom. You end up sort of getting in a situation where the top 10 end up staying in the top 10 because every new person who gets a wallet just picks one of them, right?
Right. It's what constitutes top. Is it the most people that are using that proxy? Is it the ones that vote for certain types of worker proposals? I mean, what criteria do you use to rate them in the top whatever?
Well, I think it would have to be quantitative in the official wallet. You'd have to just say people with most votes. Otherwise, you're getting into a qualitative something that's difficult to define. And I always thought there'd be an opportunity. Maybe you'd have to figure out a business model for this because nobody wants to do things for free, but to have a voting wallet, where basically anyone can just proxy an account to this voting wallet and have all of these different features where you can explore and stuff. But that's all way more complex. I think what we're talking about here, I agree with Tom though. CryptoFresh is such a good resource for this kind of thing. And, I don't know, I'm kind of up in the air. I'm undecided about whether, having this in the wallet would be beneficial or not. In the long term, or would it just lead to, consolidation of proxy voting power?
Actually, I think that limiting the amount of people on the list would be very dangerous because at the end of the day, the rich people get richer, and the people with most votes will get even more votes. So this will be very difficult to in the future to create any kind of opposition. So I would be against that. But we could actually do something different. Actually, people should be more aware who the proxy is. We already say that. So we could implement in the wallet that the wallet will randomly show description of some proxy. We could prepare some field with description, and every time when someone will open a wallet, different proxies should appear. So this should work like some kind of advertisement in the TV, which could help you make an opinion about specific person. And after some time, you will at least know some faces, and maybe you decide, okay, that's time to put my vote on that person. Maybe that could be a way.
If we were to
Just
make
a link to
CryptoFresh. If we're going to make a change to the wallet, I would propose doing what you just said, Noisy, is having some kind of rotating banner for individuals, and then a link to CryptoFresh or some other site that gives you any choice you want. All of them would be in that other alternative location, but one might be featured. I think that would be a reasonable way to do it, where you're not featuring one individual, but you're just kind of highlighting one individual for a particular short period of time, a link to a more broader spectrum of people you could choose from.
Well,
another approach is to just make it a pay to play. You pay to get advertising space for your proxy. So it's not necessary that you have a lot of votes, but if you're willing to advertise to get more votes, that means you're more active.
Well, yeah, this is politics, right? So that makes sense. I imagine that'll probably be something that a lot of different specialized wallets will have, paid advertising, and sure, pay to proxy is a really good way to get your name out there.
All right, it's been an hour. I'm going to check out now. I'd like to thank everyone for showing up and for hosting this Mumbles. I think we've had lots of good discussions. There's lots of exciting stuff coming in the months ahead. I'm really excited about the ideas that we're discussing for BitShares. It shows that our community is active. We're thinking about things. We've learned a whole lot. You think about where we were 2 years ago. I think we're about 2 years from the end of funding for the original BitShares. And since that time, we've gone from a proof of work blockchain to something that's dramatically beyond anything we could have conceived 2 years ago. And this is because of continual innovation by members of this community. So,
and stalwart persistence.
Absolutely. We are doing a lot together. We've come up with a lot of innovations in the space. The secret sauce for conquering still hasn't really been solved yet, in my opinion. But if there's a community that's going to solve it, I think this community has got the people in it who have learned a whole lot and can use that knowledge to take it to the next level. Because we're not afraid to try things and to challenge the accepted beliefs, the accepted dogma of the cryptocurrency world. And that allows us to think outside the box. So the number and variety of proposals from everyone from Tony K to, was it Empirical or something? These proposals have show innovation and ideas, and I see more and more good ideas being posted on the forum on a regular basis. And sometimes old ideas have to simmer, and then they come up and we realize how good they probably were. So just keep up the good work, keep sharing ideas.
Into this cycle.
And we're persevere. So thank you everyone for all of this. So I guess T-Bone asked one question. Are blind balances part of the new stealth feature? And are blind balances votable? And how will that feature work in the UI? Well, you'll be able to test all this on the testnet later today. But the short answer is that blind balances cannot vote because the network does not know what's in the balance. It wouldn't be very blind if it did. You will be able to use the feature in the user interface. So check it out later today. I'm talking with Ben. He's in the process of updating the stealth asset as we speak. So we'll probably be distributing that later today. Or so once upon a time, if you'd send me a PM with the address, the account name you'd like to receive stealth, that'd be great. Otherwise, catch you all later.